It's the summertime of 1986, and armed with a pocket full of quarters, you make your way to the local convenience store. As you walk in, you are greeted by the sounds of kids hanging out and playing arcade games. In the store, you are also greeted with racks and rows of colorful products. You've already rented a copy of Goonies, so that's your entertainment sorted. But what snacks will go with it? The biggest issue you face is whether to go for something sweet, something sour, something chewy, or something salty. Luckily, there are an endless amount of options. I'm Jamie Logie, and this is Everything 80s, a podcast that looks back on a decade that forever changed the way we dress, consume, and connected. And today we travel back to the convenience stores of yesteryear to look at some of our favorite snack options. From the chips and chocolate to the candy and drinks, this is a history of junk food in the 80s. Some of the items we'll look at here today can be North American focused and can even vary by location as different regions have their own select items. But many of the products we'll cover did have a wide release, so there's a good chance that you not only saw and bought them, but at the very least, wanted them. And we start with a popular product that wasn't edible, but you still chewed it and kept on chewing it.
Big League Shreds.
When you block a shot or two, you're in the big leagues.
Big League Flavor.
You're into Big League Chew.
Big League Chew. Fan-sized wads of great taste and shredded bubble gum stuffed into a giant Stay Fresh.
The origins of Big League Chew go back to the late 70s when the concept was created by a former Cornell pitcher named Rob Nelson. As shared on Big League Chew's official website, the idea came to Nelson when he was in the bullpen playing for the Portland Mavericks. For decades, baseball players were notorious for using chewing tobacco, or even straight up smoking in the dugouts. But gum was still popular. What about something that combined the two but was a healthier option? Nelson partnered with a bat boy from the Mavericks named Todd Field, along with Jim Bouton, an all-star pitcher who played for the Yankees. The idea they had was a simple one: shredded bubble gum kept in a pouch to keep it fresh. Creating the product was easier said than done, though, and work began at the home of Todd Field. On February 6, 1979, the first batch was made. And in a nice baseball coincidence, February 6 is also the birthday of the legendary Babe Ruth. After many trial batches, Big League Chew was officially released in 1980 and was an instant hit. Big League Chew was incredibly soft, and you didn't risk shattering your teeth like with a piece of Bazooka Joe gum or the stick of gum that used to come with sports cards. Now, 4 decades later, 1 billion pouches have been sold, and Big League Chew can even be found in the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown as the Hall of Fame bubblegum. We move from soft and chewy to hard and crunchy, with a product that goes by the name that seems to have first ever appeared in a Dr. Seuss book from 1950. In the book If I Ran the Zoo, the narrator of the book, Gerald McGrew, talks about the items he would collect for the zoo, including a Nurgle, a Nerd, and a seersucker too. Nerd's Candy first launched in 1983. The unique, crunchy, tangy, and tart candy was made up of 2 different sides in one package, each containing its own flavor. You could eat each side by itself, or combine them to create a new, unique flavor. Produced by the Willy Wonka Candy Factory that, according to MASH.com, was established just a few months before the movie came out, Nerds are basically irregular shaped sugar clusters. Some of the original flavors from 1983 included grape and strawberry, and cherry and orange. We'll see those flavor combinations again in just a few minutes. The creation of Nerds is also pretty unique. It starts with large spinning hoppers that get filled with sugar crystals. More sugar gets added as the hoppers rotate, and this process creates little, edible pebbles of various shapes. Those little pebbles are then coated in the flavored and colored candy coating. Nerds was a gigantic hit right out of the gate. Just 2 years after its release, Nerds was named Candy of the Year in 1985 by the National Candy Wholesalers Association. You probably remember the anthropomorphic Nerds characters featured on the cover of the boxes. They are a bit more character-driven than you may realize. According to Mashed, each color of nerd represents a specific identity and personality. The pink nerd is curious. Purple is deep thinking. The yellow one is logical. Red is creative. Green is humorous. And orange is spontaneous. Also, in a perfect 1980s synergy, Nerds also appeared in their own breakfast cereal. Like the candy, the cereal was made of 2 flavors, cherry and orange, and grape and strawberry. With the tagline, "Which side are you gonna eat first?" Nerds cereal was released in the mid-80s, and in my household growing up was begged for on many occasions, but to no avail. But from Jumbo Nerds to Nerds Rope, Nerds are an all-time classic candy. Let's go from hard and crunchy back to soft and chewy with another item that, even though it looked like it, wasn't gum.
Some folks think Bonkers is gum. They know it's candy now. With its extra fruity inside, Bonkers is so super fruity. Whoops!
Bonkers. Bonks you out.
Released by Nabisco in the mid-80s, Bonkers are a small, square-shaped candy with a fruity outside and a flavorful fruity center. Kind of like a Starburst. Some of the flavors that will bonk you out include lemon lime, grape, strawberry, cherry, and even chocolate. You may remember Bonkers having the texture of bubblegum, but you could actually eat it, which I always remember as feeling like a weird sensation. Bonkers was launched with a series of popular commercials featuring people getting hit by giant fruit and launching into hysterical laughter. If you read DC Comics in 1986, you may remember seeing ads for the unique chocolate Bonkers that featured a rich chocolate outside and dark fudge inside. Speaking of comic books, in 1989, Bonkers teamed up with the now incredibly popular Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Each pack of Bonkers came with one of 17 different Ninja Turtle stickers that today can fetch a hefty price on eBay. Along with the stickers, for $5 you could also send away for a limited edition Ninja Turtles poster. And for another $5, you could join the official Turtles Force fan club. This isn't the only Ninja Turtle connection to a 1980s snack, and we'll get to another one in a moment. Bonkers, the candy, didn't last super long, but the marketing campaign and Ninja Turtle tie-in made them a true short-lived hit. And those chocolate ones were pretty great. Speaking of chocolate, let's go back to 1986 and revisit what, in my mind, was a true chocolate delicacy. Hostess pudding pies, as the commercials shared, were a baked good of sorts featuring a chocolate crust filled with vanilla pudding. But what if vanilla just wasn't cutting it? Not to fear. Also in 1986, Hostess released an all chocolate pudding pie now filled with chocolate pudding. The marketing campaign to launch the chocolate version even featured commercials with a young Joey Lawrence. Hostess had been making fruit pies for years, and the iconic Twinkie goes back to the 1930s.
So kids, you ask Mom to buy some Hostess Twinkies the next time she goes to the store.
But an item like the pudding pie simply came from customer suggestions. Kathy Dunking, the public relations manager for Hostess, told the Miami Herald that something like the Hostess pudding pie didn't just come from listening to customers, but was also directed as a lunchtime item for kids. This was a product completely created for you and I. But pudding pies soon became a favorite of many ages. And here comes our next Ninja Turtles crossover, as you may remember, turtle pies. The turtle pies were filled with vanilla pudding power and made up of a green coating. The idea is that the pudding pie was filled with a mutagen goo. Anything connected to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was can't miss in the 1980s. And if you want the full history of the Ninja Turtles that dates back to 1984, I have a previous 2-part episode all about it. For many kids, though, Hostess pudding pies were one of those dream snacks. I don't know about the variety stores you grew up with, but at the one near my public school, there were battles to get to the shelves to get Hostess pudding pies, and that store could barely keep them stocked. Because remember, as the tagline told us, plain pudding just can't taste this good. Speaking of kids hanging out in convenience stores and places like 7-Elevens, in the 1980s, you may remember the specific Muzak played at them, specifically the 7-Elevens. And that has an interesting story that originated here in Canada. As shared in a CBC News report, in the mid-80s, managers at 7-Eleven stores in British Columbia were sick of teenagers hanging around the doorways. This was deterring regular customers and leading to less profit. The management of the BC stores met with psychologists to see if there was a way to tackle the issue. The simple solution they came up with? Play some easy listening, elevator, or classical music to deter teenagers from hanging out. This music experiment started at 10 BC locations before spreading to more than 150 7-Eleven locations around North America. And that practice is using music as a deterrent was then used across the world in the years that followed. But we moved from the sweet, decadent flavor of a Hostess pudding pie to something a bit more salty and savory. This brand had already been around for years, but in 1986 introduced a new specific flavor that really took the company to the next level. What if you combined a tortilla chip with a robust salad dressing? This was the foundation for Doritos Cool Ranch chips. For years, Doritos and their red bag were a staple on grocery store shelves. But now, a new blue bag stood out. An electric blue bag with a whole new flavor. Chips and dips have always gone together, but these new Cool Ranch Doritos already seem like they'd been dipped, giving them a cool but tangy flavor with a little kick to them. According to a 2012 Maxim article, that triangle shape of Doritos was originally a way to minimize waste, as a triangle shape left less trim on the outside than circles. If you grew up in a country where ranch dressing isn't necessarily popular, you may remember these under the name Cool American. In the UK, you may know them as Cool Original. Not only were Cool Ranch Doritos a hit, but they encouraged Frito-Lay to start experimenting with more unique flavor ideas. So Cool Ranch chips were a great savory snack, but what if you wanted something a little more substantial and hot? Coming up next, the incredibly popular creation invented by two brothers that was originally called the Tasty Witch.
Everything 80s will return after these messages.
Now we look back at the favorite product of comedian Jim Gaffigan. The calzone-like item was created by two Iranian brothers who came to the US, David and Paul Mirage. According to the University of Berkeley, where Paul Mirage attended, in 1977, he mortgaged his house to start a company called Chef America along with his brother. They came up with a frozen waffle to sell to restaurants and coffee shops. But this wasn't their pièce de résistance. They had another idea. An idea that they would spend the evenings developing. A portable stuffed sandwich. The item could be filled with various ingredients and quickly heated up to make a quick on-the-go hot meal. It's now 1980, and there's one problem. Less than 10% of homes own a microwave. The product, which they first called the Tasty Witch, was introduced to restaurants at first. But the brothers kept tinkering with the recipe. In 1983, the improved product was now called the Hot Pocket. But how did they improve it? Well, it was by using a patented dough sleeve to heat it in. By using the heat from a microwave, the dough sleeve essentially broils the crispy, crusty, tender, flaky crust. But this new Hot Pocket isn't yet directed at consumers, just restaurants. People are always looking to save money, and in the early 80s, it's a period of high inflation and high unemployment. Consumers are looking for cheap and easy meals. Now, it was time for the Hot Pocket to hit the market. It took a few years, but in 1985, Hot Pockets hit the supermarket shelves and are sold nationwide. By the mid-80s, a quarter of all homes now have a microwave, so it's the perfect intersection of a convenient product, cost-saving, and in-home technology. With the great commercial jingle and a variety of flavors, grabbing a hot snack that is ready in 2 minutes caught on quickly. A Hot Pocket is great, but what if you don't have access to a microwave and still want a substantial snack? Our next item is the product inspired by the TV dinners of yesteryear and created as a way to breathe new life into an old product. Lunchables. Released in 1988, Lunchables are a little tray made up of separate compartments. In those compartments, you'll find items like cheese, deli meat, and crackers. Some of the Lunchables from the late 80s even included Thin Mints. According to The Atlantic, in the early days of Lunchables, they even experimented with fresher ingredients like apple slices and carrots. But that idea had to be scrapped, as items like those did not ship or store well. Lunchables also have an interesting origin. In the 2013 book, Salt, Sugar, Fat, How the Food Giants Hooked Us by Michael Moss, we learn how, in the mid-80s, executives at Oscar Mayer noticed consumers weren't as interested in one of their staple products as they used to be: bologna. This was concerning, as bologna was one of their core products, and it had been for years.
My bologna has a first name, it's O-S-C-A-R. My bologna has a second name, it's M-A-Y-E-R.
How could they get the public more interested in bologna again? Specifically, kids. How could you make something like bologna more exciting? The company conducted many brainstorming sessions and focus groups, leading to a team of 15 people who came up with a bologna-focused lunch product. Not only was the product portable, but came with other ingredients, as the research showed that people like combining bologna with other items such as cheese or crackers. Inspired by old TV dinners, they designed the product with a tray made up of separate compartments. The most interesting thing? Lunchables was never designed for kids, but intended for adults. It was created as the ideal option for working people. But they found in their market research that kids loved assembling their own meals. When they realized what they had on their hands, Oscar Mayer switched their marketing approach and now targeted kids. This was a smart move. Earlier names considered for Lunchables included Fun Meals with a Z, Snackables, Cracker Witches, and Entrees, spelt O-N-T-R-A-Y-S. After landing on the name Lunchables, the 1988 launch was an instant success, generating $200 million in revenue in the first year. So we've had a lot of snacks so far. What about something to wash them down with? Let's look at a few notable beverage releases from the 1980s. The first is the drink item that filled lunch boxes everywhere. Not only was it the perfect lunch beverage, but also for after school, or after dinner, or on a hot summer day. It was one of the most versatile drinks of the decade. Capri Sun was officially launched in 1981. But depending on what country you're listening from, you may have known Capri Sun years earlier. The first iteration of Capri Sun went by the name Capri Sonne, S-O-N-N-E, the German word for sun, and it was released in Germany in 1969. The stand-up pouch was easily transportable, and a straw could be inserted at the top. According to Capri Sun's official website, the first flavors were lemon and orange. In 1973, a 10-pouch plastic carrier was released, and by the end of the 70s, Capri Sun began to go international, including commercials featuring the legendary Muhammad Ali. As the 1980s began, Capri Sun is released in Africa and Asia before hitting North American shores. And it caught on quickly. By 1982, Capri Sun had become so popular that it won Best New Product Launch in the United States. A big part of the appeal was the unique and convenient metallic packaging, and that really made Capri Sun stand out. It was pliable, so it could be thrown in a backpack or lunchbox and not be crushed by other items. It wasn't made of glass, so you didn't risk breaking anything. You could almost toss it around like a ball. This design ingenuity even won the company a coveted U.S. medal for Packaging of the Year. With its defining fruit punch flavor, Capri Sun is not only one of the most successful beverages released in North America in the 80s, but continued on for decades. As shared in a 2024 Forbes article, Capri Sun is now sold in more than 100 countries, with estimated annual revenue of $500 million. Next, we have a product that felt as much like a novelty product as a drink. Released by General Mills, it came out in 1985, and the name of the product was also the directions on how to consume it. Even though this is an audio format, I'm sure you can taste what I'm talking about if you ever had a Squeeze-It growing up. Squeeze-Its came in little plastic bottles that you chewed the top of, and you simply squeezed it to consume 4 original flavors: cherry, fruit punch, grape, and orange. Flavor names eventually became things like Chocolate Cherry or Smarty Arty Orange. Like Capri Sun, Squeeze-Its were pretty much indestructible. A good pro tip was to freeze one the night before so that by the time it thawed out, it was perfectly chilled. Video from the General Mills archives shares that the bottle started out quite large when released in 1985 before shrinking down in size. This was another smart move that made them perfect for an even younger audience. But in the summer of 1985, whether you were at the movies watching Goonies or Back to the Future, a Squeeze-It was the perfect companion. We now move to a soft drink, and it's the carbonated beverage that can be considered the original energy drink. It's the brand that was known as the bad boy of cola. Jolt Cola first hit the market in 1985. Directed at college students, young professionals or yuppies, computer programmers, or night owls of any type, the extra caffeine content made Jolt the go-to choice over the other colas on the market. As Coke and Pepsi had been moving into diet versions, and the soft drink market embraced sugar-free and caffeine-free, Jolt Cola went the opposite direction. Right on the can was stamped the words, "all the sugar and twice the caffeine." This was a cola not to mess with. As shared in a 1986 report on the CBC, Jolt was created in Rochester, New York by a former Canada Dry bottler named C.J. Rapp. Work on the recipe began back in 1979, and it took 4 years to get it to the Jolt Cola you knew in the 80s. There was no way to compete with Coke and Pepsi in the 1980s, but Jolt just wanted its own niche market and a small chunk of the market share. That niche market not only included the college students and yuppies, but kids were part of that target too. In the 1986 CBC News report, Bob Bell, the vice president of the Canadian company that bought the Canadian rights, says children were a target because, quote, they think it's a little naughty and a little risque, so they're going to get interested in it too, unquote. Back around the time Jolt Cola was making it to the market, Coca-Cola had an estimated 47% market share, and Pepsi claimed a 30% share. Jolt Cola would be happy with just 1%, which would still mean an astonishing revenue of around $200 million. They eventually settled in at a 0.1% market share, but had definitely made up Jolt in the market with some risque advertising and the fact they were like the counter cola. Within a year, Jolt was in 44 states and available here in Canada. So, did Jolt Cola contain enough caffeine to take down a small bull elephant? not exactly. According to Mental Floss, Jolt Cola had to fall under the Food and Drug Administration cap of 6 milligrams of caffeine per fluid ounce for soft drinks. Jolt got it as close as they could, landing on 5.9 milligrams. According to the National Soft Drink Association, a can of Jolt contains 71.2 milligrams of caffeine. To put that into context, a regular can of Coke has around 34 milligrams of caffeine. An 8-ounce can of Red Bull, about 80 milligrams. 2 ounces of espresso, around 100, and a regular drip coffee has anywhere from 115 to 175 milligrams of caffeine. So Jolt was indeed a caffeine shot, but not really when compared to other regular coffee drinks. Even 8 ounces of Ben & Jerry's coffee fudge frozen yogurt has more caffeine than a can of Jolt Cola. Still, as a kid, Jolt Cola's reputation preceded it. It did indeed feel off limits, and I would have been terrified to drink one based on the mystique and reputation of what, at the time, felt like a mythical soft drink. And to wrap this up, let's finish with one more candy. If you grew up in the 70s, you knew them as Mars Men. Created by Frank Galatalli, the small chewy candies with a sugar-like coating look like little aliens and came in lime, lemon, orange, and raspberry flavors. But as the 1980s began, Mars Men needed more traction. They needed an overhaul. They needed a rebranding. According to Advertising Week, one of the reasons Mars Men may have had that name was to capitalize on the popularity of NASA and space exploration. In the 1980s, specifically 1983, a new doll was released, creating one of the biggest toy crazes in history, the Cabbage Patch Kid. To capitalize on this new craze, in 1985, Mars Men were reintroduced to the market, but this time with a new look and under a new name, Sour Patch Kids. So that's some of the best snacks, candy, drinks, and junk food from the 1980s. A decade that introduced many products that were not only beloved at the time, but are still with us to this day. So thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, there's plenty more where that came from. And if you're looking for more 1980s food-related shows, here are some suggestions for further listening. I have an episode all about the 1985 debacle of New Coke. There's an episode on the battle for pizza supremacy in the 1980s that pitted Little Caesars, Domino's, and Pizza Hut all up against each other. And I also have an episode about the 1980s Burger Wars and the knockdown, drag-out fight between McDonald's and Burger King. But besides those ones, there are a ton of other episodes waiting for you to dive into them. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the Everything 80s podcast wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss out on new episodes. But thank you again so much for spending your time with me here today. I'm Jamie. This has been Everything 80s, but I'll be back soon with the new episode. Don't you dare miss it.